Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was a gamer between dimensions. When a boy wakes up in the world of Naruto with no memory of the past, foggy memories of the future, and a convenient gamer-like ability, so what's he to do? The only option is to get stronger and move forward. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard! Chapter 22. Third-person POV. It was the dead of night, silence permeating most households in Konoha. Kakashi slept in his bedroom, yet his mood seemed agitated as he tightened his eyes even further and shuffled on the bed as if he was struggling in his dream. As he was deep in his REM sleep, his eyes were rapidly moving underneath his eyelids. His brain tried to decipher the signals being sent by its nerve cells as he dreamt. However, it was evident that something else was interfering with his dreams. He was running through a dense bamboo forest that seemed to have no end in sight. He couldn't run forever. So, he stopped. He turned back to face his pursuer as the individual in question floated in front of him. With white hair and red eyes, the childish figure covered in bandages slowly floated downwards. It has been a long time, Kakashi Hatake. As he said this, his body suddenly transformed into a more adult version of himself and he took a step closer to Kakashi. Eyes wide, Kakashi took a half step back and looked up at the individual. "You're Hiroko." The now adult version of Hiroko slowly approached Kakashi and placed a palm on his forehead before a smile formed on his lips. The white-haired Konoha Jonin hurriedly took a few steps back. However, it was too late. His single Sharingan active, a red seal glowed on Kakashi's forehead in the appearance of an eye with another circle inside of it resembling a pupil. It had 4 lines stemming from the upper line of the eye and 2 big thick lines stemming from the side of the eye. As soon as that was complete, Hiroko smiled once before slowly fading away. Kakashi slowly sat up from his sleeping position as the seal on his forehead glowed in an eerie crimson light before slowly fading away. Soon after, his eyes glowed red as he sat there, dazed and out of focus as the sun slowly began to rise. Yoru, gamer. Yoru's POV. You have slept in your bed. HP and CP are fully stored. All negative status conditions have been removed. Happy birthday. Ishem, I was finally 11 years old. Not that it really meant anything. That aside. Oh, thankfully that actually worked. I had never actually been poisoned so severely before, well, except for that time my teacher kidnapped me and convinced me to join Root. I hadn't gotten my toxin resistance then though, so it didn't count. Anywho, I had been gambling that my body would fix itself after sleeping. If it didn't, I would just go to Tsunade and have her make a cure. It wasn't like I'd suffer much without my chakra anyway since my body was decently strong on its own. In any case. Mouse, why are you at my house at 6 o'clock in the morning? Said individual simply gave me hand seals from outside the window. Hokage requires your presence. I sighed. I never get a break, do I? As for why Mouse was outside, my house was layered with seals as a precaution. Only a handful of people had access to my little apartment, such as Kushina, my adorable Mito, Minato, and obviously my teacher. And maybe Itachi. And possibly Rin. And probably Kakashi. Then there was also Obito, who was no longer here. I gave Mouse a hand signal, I'll be there in a moment. He nodded and vanished. With that, I quickly washed myself off with some water collected from the air and put on my hench clothes before heading out of my house. Hopping over some houses eventually landed me in front of the Hokage's building, which I promptly entered before walking up to Minato's job office. Since he was expecting me, I didn't bother knocking on the door and simply opened it and walked in. I looked around for a moment to see Minato, Jiraiya, Orochimaru, and Kakashi. You're here. Minato stated with a smile as I entered the room. I nodded. In that case, I'll explain why you're all here. The blonde Hokage continued before looking at Kakashi and sighing. This morning, I got confirmation on what Hiroko's 5th Kekkai Genkai would be. No one here was stupid. From the simple look Minato had given Kakashi, it was clear that the object of desire was his Sharingan. That, however, begged the question. Why would he go after Kakashi? Why not target an Uchiha with an already developed Sharingan? Orochimaru asked in interest. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Kakashi subconsciously touch his left eye as Minato replied. I can only assume that he didn't want to target someone too difficult for him. This is also under the assumption that he only needs one eyeball of the activated Sharingan. Based on his actions, I'm assuming this is the case. This is quite problematic, Jiraiya stated in thought. The Uchiha won't be too happy if their eyes are taken, especially by an outsider. And that's why you are all here, Minato stated. We all perked up. The 4th Hokage looked at Orochimaru. I assume you've completed it by now? He smiled widely, of course. With that said, he took out a scroll and unfurled it before in a puff, a glass cylinder filled with viscous green liquid appeared. All you will need to do is have him absorb this the instant he tries to absorb you, Orochimaru explained as he looked at Kakashi. The containment tank will burst on command and release the fluid inside. It will then destabilize his body's composition, causing his cellular structures to degrade. Kakashi's eyes widened. Jiraiya raised a brow. That's quite intense, and just a little gross. Orochimaru smirked proudly at that fact. Though, I got this feeling that he was subtly looking my way again. Regardless, we have a way of beating him. We need to hurry before the other villages try to put more pressure on us. The daimyos of the 5 great nations has given Konoha an ultimatum: get rid of Hiroko. Minato declared before glancing at Jiraiya. I would like for you to help keep watch over our IWA, Kumo, and Kiri borders with your extensive network, Sensei. Collaborate with Shikaku Nara on the positioning of our troops if necessary. The white-haired Sannin smiled. You can leave it to me. Though, I don't think you'll have to worry too much, he said while looking at me and Kakashi. The younger generations always seem to be more splendid than the older. Minato smiled. That may be true, but I want to be safe. That said, he finally addressed my role in this. Yoru, I want you to watch over Kakashi while this is happening. I furrowed my brows. What exactly is the plan? Hiroko cast a puppet master jutsu formula on me sometime in the recent past. Kakashi began to explain. I'll let myself become susceptible to his control, and just as he is about to absorb me, you will attack him with that. He finished, pointing to the see-through cylinder. That's risky, I stated. Something like this can easily screw up. What if you are caught in the blast zone after the contents are released? Kakashi picked up the cylinder and walked up to me before placing it in my hands. He looked me in the eyes. I trust you and your skill, which is why I recommended your help in particular. My eyes widened. With that, Kakashi left it there as I paused for a moment to ruminate over his words. I sighed. I'll do my best to not disappoint the faith you placed in me. Kakashi nodded. Then it's settled, Minato stated. I only kept it between us 5 in order to prevent any sort of information from leaking ahead of time. With this, you all are dismissed. Quest alert. Hiroko and Chimera friends. Find and defeat Hiroko before he is able to absorb all 5 Kekkai Genkai during the solar eclipse. Reward, 250,000 EXP, 10 stat points. Failure, death. Yoru, gamer. You ready? I asked Kakashi as we stood a great distance away from Konoha. He nodded his head before closing his eyes. In but a moment, his head slumped. Like a mindless drone, his body slowly positioned itself upward, allowing me to see the puppet curse mark on his head. His eyes glowing red, Kakashi turned around and rapidly made his way to the distance. I immediately followed him and rushed through the trees while simultaneously keeping myself on guard. The surroundings became a blur as we moved through the densely packed forests of Konoha, landscapes constantly changing due to the speed of our motion. It wasn't until about a minute afterward that the landscapes drastically changed once more. Gone were the vibrant green trees that made up the lush forests, and instead, rocky soil and mountainous regions became more prevalent in my vision. Before long, grass became barely visible in my view as only mountains of stone were in sight, indicating my arrival on the village hidden in stone's soil. The village hidden in stone, Ishigekure, was not to be confused with the hidden stone village, Iwagakure. As for why they had such similar names that drove many to confusion, no one knew. An empty Shumazen. As we were now in the Korin mountain range, I could finally see the large mountain that greatly protruded from the earth in the distance. I looked down at Kakashi, who was still possessed by the enemy's technique, before looking ahead. There I saw a large open gate in front of me in the middle of the wide path that we were taking towards the mountain. In little time, Kakashi ran through the open gate and I quickly moved to follow him. I hastily jumped back as little feathers around the gateway lit up before detonating. The wind force generated from the blast pushed me further back and I skidded across the dirt path. In the same instance, a chakra signature finally came into my range from above, causing me to immediately turn my gaze upwards. It was there that I saw a large bird-like creature that had an orange face, green feathers, and white skin. It had a very large wingspan which had distinctive markings that combined near the middle and also had two jet-like pistons near the end of its body, with two tails attached. That looks troublesome, I thought as the bird monster screeched and rained down feathers at me. In but a moment they began to glow as they all surrounded me. I'm not dealing with this. ID create, empty. The sky turned red. The surroundings became silent. And more importantly, the feathers disappeared. With seemingly nothing to distract me in my own personal dimension, I made my way forward. Ping. ID, create, has leveled up by 1. ID, create, is now level 50. You have unlocked, PD. ID, create, active, LVL 50 max. Available instant dungeons. Empty ID, monsters, none. Zombie ID, monsters, zombies. Ghost ID, monsters, ghosts. Werewolf ID, monsters, werewolf. Vampire ID, monsters, vampires. Cyclops ID, monsters, troll/cyclops. PD. Cost, 200 CP. PD is your own personal dimension/pocket dimension that you have access to and in which you can store a variety of things from items to living beings. I blinked. And blinked again. Neat. I figured that I might as well check it out for a moment since the solar eclipse necessary for Hiroko's technique would not occur for a little while longer. ID create, personal. Immediately, space-time seemed to warp before the scenery abruptly changed. Gone were the red sun and skies, and in its place was a world of pure white. I looked around, noting that floating around this empty room of white were white and transparent cuboid structures. They simply hung in the air and I could see some up above as well. Interesting, I thought, but seeing as there wasn't really anything unique about it, I made to leave and continue on with my mission. Arf! A roar filled with a multitude of emotions sounded from the distance that was barely inside my chakra detection range. I could sense the power of the creature and knew that it was definitely not human. Just as I was about to simply take my chances with the bird, I furrowed my brows as I realized that this chakra signature was familiar. And then, it hit me. My expression turned strange. I will kill you. Anger and hatred were the primary emotions I felt emanating from the owner of the gigantic chakra signature as it approached me so quickly that I didn't even get a chance to blink as the beast appeared in front of me. It was a gigantic red monkey with 4 tails. The 4-tailed bijou. With a giant leap, the 4 tails launched itself into the air before landing in front of me. The impact of its large body on the ground caused a large shockwave that caused a large gust of wind to pick up. Tier, High 6C. Name, Four Tails. Race, Tailed Beast. Level, LVL 220. HP, 5850000/585000. CP, 5850000/585000. STR, 6000. VIT, 6500. Dex, 4500. Int, 3500. WIS, 3500. NG, 6500. We looked at each other. Well, it was more like I was looking at him while he was frothing at the mouth and glaring at me. It was quite unsettling. I suppose it's a little too late to apologize? Give me one good reason why I shouldn't kill you for trapping me in this godforsaken place. The monkey said, raising its arms high in the air. Because if you do, I began. You will most likely be trapped here forever. It paused before it slammed his fists on either side of me, deep cracks spreading throughout from his rage. The ground underneath me gave way while the cracks traveled to the distance. The monkey lowered itself to my gaze and exhaled a breath of air from its nose, the resulting winds forcing me to close one eye and raise my arms in defense. And why should I believe you? Rashi died in my personal dimension, I stated. And while I had no idea Bijou could survive after their host died, it looks like you were automatically transported here when he did. I didn't have access to this place until just a moment ago, but it is mine. It stands to reason that if I die, this dimension will either collapse and you'll be lost in a dark void of nothingness, or, more likely, no one will ever have access to this place and you will stay here forever. It paused at that statement, its eyes searching me for any traces of deceit. Its brows furrowed. How long have I been here? Well, I killed Rashi when I was 9, so... 2 years. 2 years. It roared, the resulting shockwave blowing my body away and the surrounding floating cuboid structures that littered the air. It didn't matter to the Four Tails, however, as it glared at me. Take me out this instant. Or I won't mind spending the rest of my immortal live in this void with your corpse. I picked myself up and idly noticed that the floating cuboids were floating back towards their original position before I dusted myself off. How do I know you simply won't kill me after we leave? The monkey sneered. Unlike you humans, I never break my word. If you won't believe me, then you will die. The choice is up to you. From the emotions I could detect, I knew that the monkey had immense pride and was definitely not lying. I didn't, however, want to simply let the Four Tails go without at least getting something. That's fine, but I would at the very least like to ask you to help me with Dash. No. It snarled. You have no right to ask anything of me. I furrowed my brows. It will be inconsequential to you and will only require as much effort as it takes to flick your finger. There was a grimace on its face, however, it considered for a moment before its tone lowered. Tell me. So, I did. He snickered. That's it? It really is that simple. I'm not unreasonable. I said it would be that simple and I meant it. A snort escaped the Four Tails' lips as he replied. You humans are all so deceitful. If he is more than I bargained for, I'll simply leave after completing my end of the deal. I nodded my head. Fair. Then, I raised my hand. ID create, empty. A formless bubble encompassed me and turned the surroundings into a mirror image of the outside world. Finally. How I miss the green grass, the red sun, and the crimson sky, HUI. Where the hell are we? He's still here. I thought to myself. I hadn't been in contact with him when we left, so why had he appeared with me in my empty ID? Was it because we had come here from my personal ID, so it had just dragged whatever was next to me? The monkey looked around before its gaze narrowed as it turned towards me. Human. If you dared to trick me. Accelerated analysis quickly allowed me to come up with an excuse for my current predicament. This is an empty world that mirrors the real one. I wanted to avoid any hassles on our way since the enemy has some troublesome minions under it. We can simply travel to our destination while I'm here and avoid all issues. When we exit this mirror world, we will appear in the same position in the real world. Ping. Lie, partially successful? Sun narrowed his eyes. Fine, but I don't trust you. Before I could react, I found myself in the grip of the ape who was staring at me harshly. You humans are all so slippery, so tell me where you want to go and I'll go there. I nodded and told him where we had to go. I had thought to simply ditch the monkey inside the personal ID and deal with it when I was stronger, but who would have thought this would happen? Is this what they call being a victim of one's own ingenuity? By the way, what's your name? I asked, trying to break the somewhat tense atmosphere between us. I could feel how startled it was from the question. I'm surprised that you know that we even have names or that you care. I don't. I was just curious. It doesn't really matter if you say it or not. It narrowed its eyes before grinning. I am the handsome monkey king of the water screen cave, the king of the sage monkeys, bestowed with the Dharma name of Sun by the sage of 6 paths. I am Son Goku, the great sage equaling heaven. Sage of 6 paths. I thought while furrowing my brows. Given to him by the sage of 6 paths? The guy must be powerful if this monkey respects him, or girl, can't be sexist and all that. Neat. Sun snickered. You humans don't even appreciate the kindness and generosity bestowed upon you by the sage. Using his gifts for meaningless trifles such as war, pathetic. I didn't know how I felt about being looked down by an overgrown ape. I shook those thoughts out of the way and focused on the approaching mountain ahead. Based on evidence gathered from the technique, Hiroko needed 3 requirements to perfect it and seemingly become immortal: earth, heaven, and human. Earth was the mountain itself, heaven was the solar eclipse, and human was the 5 human sacrifices. Since this mountain would be right along the path of the solar eclipse, it was the perfect setup for him. Along with those thoughts, we finally arrived at Hiroko's fortress in my ID. I immediately noted the large castle that was built on the mountain summit in addition to the walls surrounding it. In front of the castle was the only visible entry point, which was a large metal gate. It seems like I'm here. This is where we'll get off. I said. Sun brought his fist closer to his face. I'm not letting you go until I see the clear blue skies again. Now, do it. With a mental TSK, I raised my hand. ID escape. The dimension cracked before splitting apart like glass, allowing the natural blue sky and... Oh, right, there's about to be a solar eclipse. I thought as the moon began to move over and cover the sun, casting a shadow over the land. He grinned in ecstasy. Haha, finally. This one is the happiest ape in the world. Ha ha ha. It then beat its chest with its fists and howled in joy. Unfortunately for me, I was still located in his grasp, so every time he banged against his chest, my brain was rattled and I felt dizzy. Can you not? Ha ha ha. He laughed to himself before simply tossing me away. I flipped in midair and softly landed on the ground before focusing on the matter at hand. I could sense Kakashi's chakra signature behind the metal gates of the palace and knew that I didn't have much time. I looked at the ape. I'm going to go inside and do my thing. Just wait for a little for my signal. Don't tell me what to do. Sun sneered before he leaped to the sky and disappeared behind the mountains. I blinked before realizing that he hadn't ditched me and was just hiding behind the palace. At least he's earnest. And so, without further ado, I entered my ID. Since whatever actions I did in here would not be replicated on the outside world, I obliterating the iron gate barring me from my destination. After entering said gate, I finally exiting the ID. I was not prepared for what I was about to see next. Yes, Kakashi. Come inside me and give me your Sharingan, ha ha ha. Hiroko yelled in glee as the lower half of his body began to exude a large mass of deep blue, viscous fluid that covered the surrounding area. The fluid formed into tentacles which wrapped around 4 of the 5 individuals around him who were all tied up on crosses. I contemplated saving them for a moment, but then a different idea formed in my mind. I watched as they dissolved into a gooey substance that was then absorbed into Hiroko. He looked up to the open peak of Mt. Shumasen, which gave him a perfect view of the solar eclipse. "Once you've become a part of me, I will be immortal," he yelled as his tentacles wriggled and squirmed as they wrapped around Kakashi's legs and arms before they began to drag him into Hiroko's liquidated lower half. I was stunned. This reminds me of one of those scenes in that adult book Jiraiya gave me. I furrowed my brows and shook my head as I quickly dispelled those weird thoughts. Now's not the time. I can't watch as Kakashi gets anally raped by a slime tentacle monster who's also a dude. I will not allow tentacle yaoi. And with those thoughts that highlighted the full extent of humanity's capacity for intelligent thought, I took out the large tube of creepy green liquid I had been given by Orochimaru and threw it. As he had been reveling in the pleasure of almost completing his goal, in addition to the fact that his entire lower half had been converted into a giant, slime-like, liquidous agglomeration, Hiroko failed to escape from the vat of suspicious fluid that landed directly into his viscid lower body. It was only then that he stopped laughing and looked at me in surprise and fury. "What do you think you are doing? How are you able to get past my chimeric beasts and inside my castle?" I ignored him. Explode. The tube of liquid Orochimaru had given me exploded inside Hiroko and released its load all over his insides. I pinched the bridge of my nose. "I need help." "No. What have you done to me?" Hiroko yelled as his lower's body began to bulge, contract, and expand at weird intervals. Next, bubbles began to form all over his liquidated lower half. Before it burst, large volumes of suspicious fluid escaped from Hiroko and filled up the room. I, however, would not allow such disgusting liquid to touch my skin and used my water manipulation to split the sea of Hiroko's fluids. This can't be. I should be the ultimate immortal shinobi. Ah! He screamed as he plopped into the lake of his fluids in anger. I felt around for Kakashi's chakra signature before I manipulated the watery fluid and floated his corpse over to me. Next, I removed the liquid from his person and hoisted him on my shoulder before looking behind me at the locked large metal door. As I didn't like the way it was blocking my path, I kicked it. The gates flew into the distance, and as if a dam had burst, the fluid in the room rushed out of the new opening. Of course, I continued to make sure I didn't let a single drop of it on me. "Wakey," I said as I began to poke Kakashi's cheeks after having walked out of the mountain's interior where Hiroko had built that room. Kakashi's eyes trembled before they opened, and he looked at me. "Did we get him?" "It's not completely over yet," I said as I healed Kakashi and sat him up. His complexion became better and his back straightened as he looked into the cave with a serious glint in his eyes. "He's coming. Kakashi!" Hiroko yelled before an immense spike of energy erupted from inside the palace. A red beam shot out from the ceiling of the building and reached to the clouds before spreading them apart. The earth trembled and the ground fractured as the energy tore the surroundings. Before it burst, a hurricane of wind was generated as the energy obliterated Hiroko's hideout, causing dust and debris to spread all around. Kakashi covered his eyes in order to protect them while I waved my hand and used my wind manipulation to dispel the dust cloud and powerful winds. In front of us, Hiroko softly floated to the ground before eyeing Kakashi like a sack of meat. "Wait, my friend, Kakashi," he said as he slowly walked towards us with a bright smile. "It's not over yet. The solar eclipse is still here. You can still become a part of me." Tier 7A. Name, Hiroko. Race, human. Level, LVL 150. HP, 5468555/750000. CP, 376883/750000. STR, 2000. VIT, 2500. Dex, 2000. Int, 3500. Wis, 1000. NG, 2500. I looked at him, then I turned my gaze to Kakashi and warned him, if he gets his hands on you, I recommend you clench your ass as tight as you can. For some reason, he gave me the strangest look. Kuchios. Hiroko yelled after dipping his finger in his own blood and slamming his palm on the ground. As soon as the summoning inscriptions finished spreading, a puff of smoke obscured our view for a moment before multiple large chakra signatures appeared. It was only when the smoke cleared that I saw that Hiroko had summoned a variety of chimera beasts, and even that damned bird was among them. Good thing I had a plan to get rid of it and Hiroko. Son, now would be a good time to show yourself. Poof. The ape snorted as he appeared from above, his body growing larger and larger in our view before he slammed into the ground. The earth caved beneath his immense weight while dust and debris picked up from his landing. Hiroko froze. This. Kakashi's eyes widened. Is that the four tails? Call me Son Goku. The ape roared in annoyance. I hate it when you humans call me by the number of my tails. How would you like it if I called you pink-eyed with white hair, huh? Kakashi stuttered unresponsively. I get your point, but we have more important issues, I said as I pointed to Hiroko and his motley crew of monstrosities. Get rid of them, please. The ape snorted. Fine. After this, I can't wait to never see you again. Hiroko backed up in a panicked wait. I was supposed to be a perfect immortal and complete ninja. Sun rolled his eyes and flicked his finger in Hiroko's direction. That was it. His simple action sounded like millions of paper bombs had gone off at the same time. The sheer wind pressure from his attack immediately shredded up all of Hiroko's summons, and I was only able to glimpse at Hiroko's despaired face before my view was blocked by the dust that picked up. The attack traveled the distance and destroyed multiple mountain peaks along the way before its kinetic energy was finally exhausted. I'm done with my end of the deal. Goodbye. Before I could even say anything, the monkey leaped from his position and picked up a surge of wind from his launch before his form disappeared into the clouds. Kakashi watched him disappear into the clouds. So this is the strength of a tailed beast. Don't worry about that. Focus ahead, I said. Somehow, that thing is still alive. Almost like he's a cockroach. It's not over yet. Hiroko yelled as the dust began to settle. As long as you merge with me, Kakashi, we'll become matchless. Immortal. Hiroko. HP, 48685/750000. I raised a brow. How exactly did you survive that? I only heard a chuckle in reply before the dust finally cleared and in front of me appeared a Hiroko whose entire skin was covered in a black metallic luster. Ha ha. I still have 4 of my 5 Kekii Genkai. He clapped his hands together as a pillar of red chakra erupted from his body before he began to generate black storm clouds that flickered with electricity. They swarmed around him before traveling up to the sky and mixing with the cumulus clouds already present in the atmosphere. My storm release will cover the nation in darkness. I frowned. What type of bullshit storm release is this? My storm release only lets me shoot laser beams while he actually generates storm clouds. I call hacks. Kakashi, we must defeat this hacker before he glitches mud style into wood release, I said. Kakashi simply nodded in reply. Then we moved. We rapidly dashed towards our opponent, who received us with a grin. I reached him first and leveled a punch towards his midsection, which he deftly deflected with the back of his hand before he jabbed at me. I blocked him, using my free hand augmented with chakra to slam into his face. He ducked under my blow. I raised my knee, intent on caving his lowered face in. Hiroko merely raised his hands protectively, and when I impacted them, I felt like I was hitting metal. The force of the attack launched him back, which was when Kakashi zoomed behind him and attacked. Hiroko was quick to maneuver around and block the impact from behind with his elbow before engaging in hand-to-hand combat with Kakashi. Their blows were well calculated and precise while their feet shifted and pivoted with each attack as they reacted to each other. As their hands and feet blurred in combat, I appeared behind Hiroko. Deconstructive analysis displayed his weaknesses. I gathered chakra to my fingertips. Let's hope the Hyuga don't file for copyright. My fingers jammed the weak points visible in Hiroko's arm, causing it to slack for a moment. "You?" he said as he turned towards me. At that instant, Kakashi swept his feet from under him. As time slowed down in my vision, I immediately raised my leg and kicked Hiroko up high into the sky. His face contorted in pain and he coughed up a glob of blood before he screamed. Kakashi and I exchanged a look. Grabbing his leg, I spun and threw Kakashi up at a higher velocity than Hiroko's ascent. Kakashi passed Hiroko by and reached his apex in the air with his leg raised. And brought it down. Hiroko was slammed downwards towards me at immense speeds. I placed my right foot back and just as he reached chest level with me, I rammed my knee into his face, causing it to distort with a crack as he flew into the distance. Kakashi fell to the ground and puffed into a Fuma shuriken. I grabbed onto the center of the shuriken and twirled it in my palms before rapidly throwing it at Hiroko's form. The man recovered quickly, and just before it pierced his heart, his chest gave off a metallic luster. The large shuriken bounced off of him with a metallic ring, and in my view, time slowed down as it flipped in the air from the rebound. Amanoto Kotachi. I appeared right in front of him, a Rasengan fully formed in my hand and aimed at his face. Hiroko grinned and stretched out his palm, which had a mark resembling two diamonds, one overlapping the other. In that instant, the energy from my Rasengan rapidly dwindled as it was sucked up by the markings on his open hands. "I'll give everything back to you." Saying so, the diamond on his palm glowed once more before an immense burst of energy was released from it. At such a close range it would usually be impossible for me to dodge, however, I quickly flicked a kunai in the air and used Amanoto Kotachi to replace myself with it. Before it detonated, I jumped back with a backflip and landed in a crouching position. Suddenly, I was forced to tilt my head both ways in rapid succession in order to dodge the white ropes of bandages that had been aimed at my head. At the same instant, I threw 3 more metal projectiles in the smokescreen as I used my energy resonance to pinpoint Hiroko's position. All I gained in reply was the sound of metal clashing against metal. I subtly twitched my fingers. Hiroko suddenly shot out of the smoke towards me, using his bandages to catapult himself my way. His arm glistening with a black metallic sheen, he shot it forward at my face. He may have been faster than me based on his stats, but with my accelerated analysis, I was easily able to read his moves and tilted my head, causing the fist to brush past my cheek. I leaned forward, right arm cocked before I quickly struck a weakness that I had seen with my deconstructive analysis. He coughed as he took a step back before he quickly righted himself, took a step forward, and spun a kick aimed at my temple. I lifted my arm up to guard, feeling his metal-coated heel sink into my skin and crack my ulna in the process. Hiroko smiled and used my arm as leverage to lift himself up and spin in midair before he lifted his leg high and brought it down in an axe kick above my head. I quickly leaned back, his foot cratering the ground as it missed its mark. And then, he blurred. That swift dash. Ice release, crystal walls. A devastating crack sounded out behind me as my hastily put up ice defenses nearly shattered from Hiroko's attack. Before I could relax, his position rapidly changed as he attacked me from my right side. However, with my increased reaction speed, I was barely able to put up another ice release, crystal walls around me. This time, it crumbled under the force and speed of Hiroko's blow. However, it was able to slow him down enough. Through my vision, the spots of his weaknesses were made clearly evident the moment he had broken through my crystal walls. I concentrated chakra to my fingertips and jabbed them forward rapidly towards the greatest weak spot of his that I could see. His heart. Having just finished breaking through my crystal walls, his momentum was still strong enough that he was unable to dodge in time and could only tank the attack with his body. Seeing my fatal attack, Hiroko twisted his body to the side, causing my fingers to graze past his chest and make slight contact with his right shoulder. Hiroko's velocity caused him to fly past me as he quickly controlled his balance and landed his feet in the ground before he slid to a stop. He looked at his left hand, which was hanging limply by his side due to its blocked tenketsu, and narrowed his eyes at me. And vanished. He appeared right in front of me, a wide grin on his face as he held a swirling ball of chakra on his right hand. My eyes widened. Motherfu dash. My ice release crystal walls were immediately shattered as the enemy used my own technique against me. The Rasengan slammed into my gut and burst upon impact, causing me to cough out some blood as my poor body was sent flying away. I was forced to hastily flip in midair and drag my feet across the ground before I was able to obtain some measure of stable footing. Danger sense saved my neck from getting crushed as the wind whipped up above me from Hiroko's missed kick. Parallel processes allowed me to react to and block the knee which had been aimed at my face, using its force as leverage to propel myself upwards into the air. After a deep breath, I exhaled a great dragon-shaped flame with my great dragon fire jutsu towards Hiroko, whose expression contorted. I smirked. With the tenketsu of his left hand fully blocked, he couldn't lift it to absorb my jutsu. My fingers twitched. Hiroko's eyes widened as his arm suddenly stuck to his side just before the attack impacted his body, directly causing a heat wave to spread to the surroundings. Before I landed on the ground, I sucked in my breath once more. Fire style, majestic fire destruction. A massive stream of intense flames was expelled from my mouth and engulfed the area I had previously set ablaze. I loved fire-style techniques. They were one of the fastest technique types to execute as they required the most minimal movements. In addition, they were very destructive as well. As I landed on the ground, I tightly gripped the metal wire I had wound around Hiroko in our earlier scuffles and gripped them to keep him in place. This tactic never gets old. I love it. You think, this can hold me? Hiroko stated as he struggled against the wire, his strength straining his bindings and threatening to break them. Thankfully, I didn't need them to hold. At the instant that I had secured Hiroko in place, a shuriken, an inconspicuous piece of metal in the battlegrounds of Shinobi, suddenly puffed in smoke before Kakashi appeared. His lone Sharingan glowed red as he appeared behind the enemy like a predator. The sound of 1,000 birds chirping echoed across the mountains. Flesh was pierced as Kakashi rammed his fist through Hiroko's back and out of his chest where his heart was. The battlefield seemed to freeze. Sure. Hiroko said slowly as he turned his head back towards the individual in question before coughing up blood. If I can't have you, no one can. My eyes widened as the roar of thunder sounded out from the sky above. Hiroko's artificially produced storm clouds had generated an immense amount of energy which all culminated into a single bolt of electricity that flickered in the eye of the storm. A thick bolt of lightning, about 10 meters in diameter, fell down from the sky. It was fast. Kakashi would not be able to outrun it. Thankfully, he wouldn't need to. Right before the lightning bolt had descended from the clouds, I flicked a kunai in the air. The lightning bolt was already halfway to its destination. Amanoto Kotachi. With a quick switch in position, Kakashi appeared next to me while my kunai took the brunt of the damage along with Hiroko. A terrifying explosion rocked our battlefield, the mountain beneath us fracturing into multiple pieces from the sheer force and energy of the attack. The shockwave threw me and Kakashi away from the mountain peak before we found ourselves falling down towards the earth a few kilometers below. Tell me you have a plan to save our lives. Kakashi asked plainly. He looked at me. We're fucked, aren't we? Let me get back to you on that. I replied before using every scrap of mental power I could to get us out of this mess. One pro/con of my Amanoto Kotachi, it really depended on the circumstance, was that when the spatial positions of two or more objects were changed, they still retained all of their kinetic energy. That meant that if I wanted to switch Kakashi and my position with another object on ground level, we would still splatter, and while I would be fine, Kakashi would only be a red smear on the ground and I would prefer for that not to happen. Another issue was that I didn't have anything at ground level anymore since the entire mountain had been destroyed and debris was free flying everywhere. The last issue was that there was a range limit associated with how far I could transport myself, which was directly proportional to the limit of my energy resonance chakra detection. This was also the reason why I didn't just teleport Kakashi and I back to Konoha the moment the mountain collapsed. My brain came up with numerous possibilities and ideas in rapid succession as the ground became nearer and nearer. Gravity forced us downwards while the air resistance caused our skin to flap backwards. Wait. I concentrated on my perfect natural wind affinity, utilizing the wind around and moving it to my desires. Below us, I formed an upward current to slow our descent before I wrapped Kakashi and myself in a whirlwind of, wind. Immediately, we slowed down enough just as we were only a few dozen feet from landing. I floated us downwards before our feet gently touched the floor. Ping. Due to special action, you have created the skill, Flight. Flight, active, LVL1, 50.00%. By controlling the airflow around your body and manipulating it to lift you off the ground, you have achieved the ability to fly. Cost, 1000 CP per min. Speed, Mach 1.5. I mentally swiped away the message before looking at Kakashi. I told you I had a plan to save our lives. He looked at me humorlessly before a smirk made its way on his face, barely visible through the face mask he wore. In any event, we need to confirm that Hiroko is dead. I nodded in agreement and used my energy resonance to catch a whiff of Hiroko's residual chakra. While he was most likely dead, I was 99% sure he was, there would still be some leftover chakra. Got it. I said as I spread out my chakra as much as I could and utilized my earth release to move over the tons of mountain rock that were obstructing me from reaching my goal. In a few moments, I was able to catch a glimpse of Hiroko's body and motioned for Kakashi to follow me ahead. I walked through the piles of rubble before appearing in front of Hiroko's body and sighing. He's definitely seen better days. That was putting it as mildly as possible. His body was burnt, skin flayed, bones were broken and twisted, and his face was disfigured. He was dead. Like, very dead. You could not get deader than that. Kakashi nodded before looking at me. Can you transport him? I nodded and placed my hands over Hiroko's body. Ice release, ice coffin. Energy coalesced in my hands before it was released and covered Hiroko's still form, forming a cocoon of ice around him. Kakashi blinked. Since when could you use ice release? A little over a year and a half ago. Neat. I stored the coffin in my inventory before looking back up at Kakashi. You wanna fly back? He stared back at me with a blank look. Is that even a question? I smirked and gathered wind beneath us before I commanded it upwards. And then, I propelled us forward. The sound barrier broke as we rapidly traveled through the air. I also made sure to form a protective wind barrier around us just so that we wouldn't accidentally swallow anything undesirable. Along the way, I found myself thinking about the true nature of my ID skill and how Sun had been able to survive inside it. I always just assumed that I was creating some sort of mirror dimension, but if that was the case, what would happen to objects or things left inside after I exited? Would they be trapped in some void? Really, the entire thing was confusing and I still had a lot I didn't know about spacetime techniques anyway. Suddenly, I stopped. Yoru? Kakashi looked at me questioningly as we floated high in the air. I looked downwards and noted that we were still in the general area of the Korin mountain range, so many hills and valleys were visible below. My lips curled downwards in a frown. I could have sworn I sensed something familiar. No, I definitely sensed something, but it was fleeting and the signature had disappeared as soon as I had approached. Kakashi looked down as well and scanned the terrain with his Sharingan. I'm not picking up any chakra signatures below. I frowned some more. Could I have been mistaken? Even if I wasn't one to take unnecessary risks. From my outstretched hand, energy coalesced before a ball of lightning formed in my hands, not unlike Kakashi's Chidori, but much, much more powerful. Lightning style, lightning bomb. I threw the bomb down towards where I had sensed the signature earlier. And it exploded. The blast wave encompassed a few kilometers wide area, turning the stone and grass to ash from the heat and energy of the attack. Was that necessary? Not really, no. And with that, we continued on our way. In a few minutes, the hidden leaf became visible to us, so I slowed us down and softly landed in front of the gates to Konoha while simultaneously startling the guards there. Wind release, flight has leveled up by 1. Wind release, flight has leveled up by 1. Seeing us, however, they moved aside and allowed us in, to which I nodded and obliged. I felt for Minato's chakra signature and found that I couldn't sense it, which usually meant that he was inside his office, or that he was obviously not in the village. With that knowledge, I made my over to his building, Kakashi in tow. In but a few moments, we found ourselves in front of the door to Minato's office, to which I knocked and waited for a moment. Come in. I opened the door and walked inside, seeing Minato working tirelessly on his desk. He paused his work and leaked a sigh of exhaustion from his lips before looking up at us with a smile. I'll assume that you completed the mission and didn't run away. I chuckled and waved my hand in the air, causing the ice coffin to appear and slam on the office floor. Was that necessary? Minato asked, face twitching before he looked at the coffin. After confirming the contents, he relaxed back into his seat with a sigh of relief as he closed his eyes. You have no idea how much pressure I've been in just these past 2 days. Thank you both, Kakashi, Yoru. Ping. Quest complete. Hiroko and Chimera friends. Reward, 250,000 EXP, 10 stat points. It was no issue, though Kakashi almost had his ass compromised. If I hadn't been there, I fear what would have happened. Kakashi shuddered and looked at me. What exactly happened while I was unconscious? I looked at him in pity. Trust me, you are better off never knowing. Minato just stared at us and seemingly ignoring everything I had said after issue. Yoro, take the body to cryogenics since it's already in ice. Kakashi, continue your mission of protecting my wife in the shadows, though I get the feeling that you won't have to do it for much longer. He smiled as he said that last part and continued explaining some more things, but the rest of his words rang silent in my ears. An ice-cold feeling of dread passed through me as he mentioned about Kushina's end-of-term pregnancy. It was as if my danger sense was screaming at me to be wary of it. Ping. Danger sense has evolved to instinct. Instinct, passive, LVL max. Instinct allows your body to detect danger from your surrounding and your immediate or near future. Just like animals are able to sense disaster before it strikes, you too are able to sense when something will go awry. I remembered the world where the Nine Tails rampaged. I remember seeing the death and destruction. Worst of all, I had seen how powerful Son Goku was, and I could only imagine the Nine Tails would be much stronger. My mind raced as this feeling of dread grew stronger. What happened that caused the release of the Nine Tails? It was definitely something with Kushina's pregnancy, that much I was certain. What could I do to stop it? If someone orchestrated its release and was able to get past Minato, how would I be able to stop him? Suddenly, I paused. If someone or something was directly responsible for the Nine Tails release and had interfered with Kushina's birth process, couldn't I just send them to a place where they couldn't interfere? I felt like slapping myself. This whole time I had been worried about this when the solution had been so damn simple. That wasn't even mentioning the fact that my ID skill had just leveled up and given me a better way to keep them safe. Even if I hadn't gotten PD, I could still have been able to send them into my instant dungeons. Now how to convince Minato about Yoru. I snapped out of my sudden trance and looked ahead to see Minato staring at me in worry. Are you alright? Yeah, I'm good. I said as I looked around and noted that while in my trance, Kakashi had already left, probably having been dismissed. I took a close look at Minato. Tier, 6C. Name, Minato Namikaze. Race, human. Level, LVL 178. HP, 115700/115700. CP, 106800/106800. STR, 3000. VIT, 3250. Dex, 6750. Int, 3500. WIS, 3000. NG, 3000. As I thought. He's still so strong. Honestly, I couldn't really imagine anyone getting the best of him, but then again, he did have to keep the seal in check while Kushina was giving birth, so if he was attacked during that time. Oh well, that wouldn't matter anymore. I looked up to him. Minato. He looked at me slightly startled. After all, I would only ever call him directly by his name if he either wasn't working or if I had something important and personal to ask. Someone or something might have been trying to screw over Kushina, the mother of my adorable Mito. This was personal. When your wife is going into labor and is about to give birth, I want to take you someplace absolutely safe. It's a place that is, as far as I'm aware, unreachable by anyone other than me, and I believe that you and Kushina will be able to focus on the newborn there without any complications. Do you trust me? There was silence between us for a moment. Before Minato smirked, really, Yoru? You should already know the answer to that. Though I have to say that we already went through a lot of preparations for this, and so to suddenly change them. He had a point. A lot of precautions were taken when a Jinchuriki was about to give birth. As the seal would weaken during that time, Kushina had to be taken to a top-secret remote area where Minato would make sure the seal was sturdy while Umbu guarded the outside. This process had already been done once before with Mito. For this baby's birth, I had already asked them to increase security, which Kushina had agreed to readily despite it seeming like I was just paranoid. There's no need to change them actually, I said after some deliberation. We can still guard the barrier and everything, it's just that no one will be actually there. A diversion? Minato asked with a raised brow. From who or what? I stared for a moment and contemplated before speaking. If I told you that I had a nightmare that the Ninetales got free and attacked the village, what would be your response? The atmosphere around him completely changed. There was no longer any kindness or joy on his face as he looked at me with a grave countenance. I would usually say that it's just a dream, however, judging from your reaction, I feel that there is more to it than that. I looked down. You don't have to tell me. Minato continued. But, if it is something you feel so strongly about, then I'll trust you to guard us. In addition, I'll send messages to bring back as many of our troops that are off on missions. My eyes widened in surprise, somewhat startled that he would take such measures just based off of what most would consider unsubstantiated fears. He smiled, as a shinobi, trusting your instincts is the best way to keep yourself alive. If something were to happen and I didn't trust my instincts, I wouldn't be able to regret it after I died. If nothing happens and I brought back our on-duty shinobi for no cause, then we'd lose some revenue to be sure, but it would be inconsequential compared to the worst-case scenario. We can all laugh it off after the fact if that were to happen. Eyes closed and fists clenched, I bowed deeply. Thank you for your faith in me, Minato. Don't sweat it, he said with his smile that seemed even more radiant than before. If I was gay, I might have already fallen for him. Minato clapped his hands. Enough of that, we're all family here. That aside. He pointed at the ice coffin. Aren't you going to bring that somewhere? Ah, right. I nodded my head and put the coffin in my inventory before bowing my head once more and exiting the room, letting a sigh escape my lips afterward. Next, I looked in the direction of Konoha's hospital and made my way over. Konoha has a plethora of lab facilities located either underneath the hospital or underneath the prison. Each, of course, had their own purpose, as the ones located under the prison were mainly used for human experimentation, where Orochimaru tended to be. The ones located underneath the hospital were for autopsies, diagnoses, drug treatment trails, and things of the like. I arrived at the underground area of the hospital and checked in with some people in cryogenics before bringing the ice coffin over to a room they had available. With that, I placed it down. I looked at the corpse of the man who had tried and failed to start another great shinobi war. I got the feeling that he wouldn't be the last fool to try either. With those thoughts, I opened the lid of the ice coffin and took out a syringe from my inventory before drawing up some of Hiroko's blood. Well, blood was a loose term since he had changed his body's composition with the use of the forbidden chimera technique, and instead, he had this viscous fluid inside him as well. However, this genetic material was enough for Orochimaru and my purposes. After the briefing of the mission to kill Hiroko, Orochimaru had called me aside to tell me that Hiroko's genes were probably the last piece of the puzzle to fully stabilize my violent DNA. I was a little hesitant to give him access to the genetic information of a guy who had absorbed 4 Kekkai Genkai, though admittedly I let him, but I needed it to grow stronger. This feeling of danger would not leave me. I wasn't stupid enough to simply ignore it. With that, I kept the syringe in my inventory and covered Hiroko's ice coffin before I focused on one of the tags I kept near Orochimaru's lab. With Aminato Kotachi, I appeared behind the door to Orochimaru's lab, which was located below the Konoha Impervious Detention Facility. Criminals were aplenty due to the war, and the facility was packed with war criminals. It was the perfect place to have a lab for someone like Orochimaru. Feeling said individual's chakra signature behind the door, I opened it and walked in. Orochimaru's back was turned towards me as he seemed to be extracting something from a centrifuge tube before adding something to it and mixing it. "Your timing could not be any more perfect," he said as he placed the tube down in a bucket of ice and looked my way. "You have it?" I nodded and tossed the syringe, which he deftly snagged from midair, and smiled. "With this, everything should be complete." I stood to the side and watched him as he took a sample of Hiroko's DNA and placed it under a microscope before adjusting the instrument. "Fascinating," he said before he took a small sample from the centrifuge tube he had placed on ice and dropped it on the glass slip where Hiroko's DNA was. He stared at the microscope for a while longer before his body shuddered. I frowned, thinking something was wrong, before I heard him laugh. It started off as a small chuckle before the volume of it increased in octaves and turned into full-blown laughter. "This is it. This is exactly what I thought would happen." I waited until he stopped his orgasm. "With this, everything should be all set." He spoke as he looked back towards me with a grin. "You said that you would let me know what your second favor was after I had figured out how to securely grant you whatever Kekkai Genkai you wanted. Tell me, what do you want?" "Raza's magnet release," I said as I took out the hair I had obtained from the third Kazekage's puppet body. Magnet release involved much more than simply combining two elements, and while I felt like I would get it eventually with enough research, I just didn't want to spend time researching it. I had already replicated some elemental bloodline limits, and magnet release was not important enough for me to spend an exorbitant amount of time on it. That being said, I still wanted it. "Take a seat," Orochimaru said, pointing to a bed on the side, which I calmly obliged to. The Sannin continued on in his work, mixing vials here, extracting things there, centrifuging this, vortexing that, etc. Until he placed his finished concoction in a small syringe and flicked it a bit before letting a bit of it dribble out of the needle tip. I tilted my head. "Can I ask what is in that?" Orochimaru walked towards me with the needle in hand. "Hiroko's DNA, in addition to the third Kazekage's, and your own, are all contained within the serum. Hiroko's genetic information helped stabilize your DNA, while I used some other primers to assist in the process." At that, and without warning, Orochimaru jammed my arm with the needle and injected the concoction into my body. Thump! I could hear the sound of my heart beating loudly in my chest. Next, Orochimaru's voice disappeared at the onset of a painful ringing sound which dominated my ears. My vision became blurry and my thoughts became slurred. Orochimaru's face was in and out of focus in my gaze, and I was unable to keep myself up as I found my balance affected. Then it stopped. "Ping! Congratulations! You have obtained Magnet release. Congratulations! You have obtained steel release. Congratulations! You have obtained swift release. Congratulations! You have obtained dark release. Congratulations! You have upgraded storm release. My vision became normal and the rest of my senses returned before I looked at the back of my hands before turning my palm upwards. I blinked. What is? I thought as I gazed upon the mark that was on the palm of my right hand. It was a mark resembling two diamonds, one overlapping the other, and it was the exact same one Hiroko had used to absorb my Rasengan. By basic process of elimination, I knew that this must have been the dark release. How is it? Orochimaru asked as he too watched me carefully. Do you feel anything off? Pain? Unstable emotions? Distorted senses? I gripped my hands and shook my head. No, I feel fine. Orochimaru hummed before he went to the wall behind me where a bunch of equipment was located. He then placed them on my person. Just to be on the safe side, I want you to test out your new ability. If you suddenly turn into a repulsive monstrosity, I don't believe either the third or fourth Hokage will let me off. I smirked as I focused on the Kekkai Genkai I had received. Magnet release. With a thought, I spread out my chakra and felt that I could interact with the magnetic metals in Orochimaru's lab and the kunai on my person. With a single thought, the kunai from my pocket levitated and appeared in front of me. I didn't stop there and concentrated on all the metal particles that I could feel around me, the iron dust underneath the ground, the metal laboratory equipment, and the iron door. I tugged and pulled at them with a mental command and they moved according to my will. Metal beds floated around me while a glittering dust cloud of iron sand floated above my head. The metal door entrance to this room groaned under my command before it began to bend and creak. Please don't ruin my lab, fixing it will come out of my own pay. Orochimaru stated plainly as he gazed at the computer in front of him. Your vitals are incredible, but I can see no other abnormal occurrences, so this must be your natural resting rate. I nodded my head and pulled off the cords and wires attached to me. Now then, I finally had an extra ace up my sleeve. However, I kept having this odd feeling as if this was inadequate. Something capable of releasing the Nine Tails was not something I would be able to beat with just this. Even if Kushina and Minato were now basically 100% safe, it was possible that something or someone would attack the village or the barrier. I needed more. I could feel it. However, to drastically increase my power in just a few days was not realistically possible. I did still have some stat points though. Status. Name, Yorodon. Race, human. Age, 11 years old. Level, LVL 97 next level, 287700/480700. HP, 403760/403760 Regan, 13,955 per min. CP, 639669/639669 Regan, 28,807 per min. CC, 100%. STR, 500 plus, 292%, equals 1,460. VIT, 500 plus, 292%, equals 1,460. DEX, 500 plus, 292%, equals 1,460. INT, 500 plus, 300%, equals 1,500. WIS, 400 plus, 300%, equals 1,200. NG, 400 plus, 492%, equals 1968. Points, 100. Rio, 6,355,348. The most important thing in any fight was strength and speed. My ENGY stat was already high enough from all the passive bonuses while I didn't need higher wisdom at this point in time. With that, I put 50 stat points in Street and DEX. With that done, I continued on with my earlier line of thought. My eyes narrowed. How could I get extremely powerful in just a few days? Kushina could give birth at any moment, which was why I only had days to work with. A thought immediately came to mind before it was helplessly squashed. Sage mode. I had never tried to incorporate natural energy with my own chakra because I knew the consequences that would occur should I fail. I may have 100% control over my chakra, but I sure as hell did not have that control over natural energy. I didn't want to risk it. If I turned to stone, I would technically still be alive, therefore, I didn't think second wind would activate and I could be petrified for the rest of my seemingly immortal life. I would rather die. It didn't help that Minato had refused to teach it to me when I asked, not out of malice, but simply because even he hadn't fully mastered it yet. I didn't have a toad summoned to teach me, and unfortunately enough, the only two people in this village with some idea about how to achieve sage mode had toad summons. Furthermore, Minato had also told me how tedious and long of a process it was to learn. In the past, I had been constantly on missions, so it wasn't like I could take a week, or even a month, since that's how long it took for Minato to gain a basic grasp of it, off to practice this. Danzo would grill me and nag about me doing my duty to the village, and I also had to complete 75% of the missions he sent me. Now wasn't any better since Kushina could give birth at any moment. What could I do? I furrowed my brows. Wait, are the toads the only ones that can teach senjutsu? I looked to my side and noted that Orochimaru was staring at his computer screen contemplatively and tapping his finger against the desk in thought. I rubbed my chin. Orochimaru wasn't one to share his secrets too openly, so if he had achieved sage mode, very few would probably ever find out unless he was forced to use it. That being said, even if the snakes could teach me, how long would it take? Actually, what was even the teaching process for this stuff? I contemplated for a moment. Maybe snakes taught it differently than toads? Well, asking never hurt anyone. Yo, Orochimaru. HNNN? He replied, his concentration on the keyboard he was typing away at. I asked, I was curious if your snake summons knew anything about sage mode. Abruptly, he stopped his work and turned towards me with a peculiar glint. Oh? May I ask why? I thought about it for a moment and figured that the worst I could owe him was another favor. As long as he didn't ask for anything uncouth. I want it, I said succinctly. However, I know that the toads take too long to teach it in time is something I didn't have in the past and I don't have now. He looked at me somewhat questionably. What do you mean? For you, I think time is the least of your worries. I paused before I shook my head. Let's just say that I had a nightmare, and if it even has a grain of truth to it, something unfortunate might in one of these next few days. His eyebrows shot up at that before he smiled. Well, you would be happy to know that the white snake sage teaches it much differently than the toads. It's much more direct. It should only take you a couple of days to obtain what you want. I blinked before schooling my features as I noticed the look in his eyes. What do you want? And more importantly, what is the catch? He grinned. You know me so well, he said before pausing for a moment in thought. The risk is, well, your life. Now, what can you offer? My what? He shrugged. If you want to learn it quickly, you'll literally have to risk your life, but seeing your conviction, that shouldn't be an issue, right? He finished with a grin. My brows furrowed in thought and I closed my eyes for a moment. Worse came to worse, I would use up my second wind life for the day. With that, I came up with my decision. However, I wondered what I could give this guy. I looked at his face. He gave me a knowing look. Of course. Steel release. I covered my arms in a layer of a steel-like chakra-based substance. Swift release. My figure blurred and I was forced to use accelerated analysis to keep track of my insane movement speed. Storm release. I focused before I released a storm cloud formed from my chakra, lightning sparking within. This was my upgraded storm release, which not only allowed me to shoot laser beams, but I could also emit actual storm clouds with my chakra and combine them with the natural clouds in the atmosphere. And finally, attack me with any chakra-based technique, I said towards Orochimaru, who was looking at me in surprise and a bit of excitement. He didn't hesitate. With only a couple hand seals, he attacked me with a bolt of lightning. I raised my right hand. The moment the lightning came into contact with it, I activated Dark Release and sucked in the energy from the attack, feeling it replenish my body. It was as if I had eaten a nice snack as my already full chakra reserve became slightly oversaturated. Remarkable, Orochimaru stated wide-eyed before he glanced at me carefully all around. How did you? Hiroko, I said simply. I had allowed him to absorb the bodies of the other village's shinobi so that I could gain their bloodlines when you made the serum for me. His eyebrows shot up before you smiled. I truly only wanted to see what I could do with your blood now that it was more stable, but this is much more interesting. I knew you would be interested in what my DNA looks like now that it's incorporated Hiroko's own along with the DNA of 4 other Kekkai Genkai users. I replied. It's yours if you agree to my terms. He answered without hesitation. I accept. I nodded and ran chakra through a kunai in my grasp before slitting my wrist. Blood immediately gushed out for a second before the wound closed. I carefully manipulated the blood with both water release and magnet release and formed it into a red floating sphere. Orochimaru obtained a container and I placed the blood inside it. He immediately slammed it shut and kept it in a fridge. He looked at me. Now then, let us take a little trip. Yoru, gamer. Third person POV. Shit. The black humanoid creature didn't even get to finish swearing in his mind as the terrain exploded into chunks of rock and debris from Yoru's attack. Who the hell did that kind of thing? Black Zetsu was lucky that he had managed to dig far deep enough that only the supplementary waves of the attack had managed to damage him. His injuries weren't light, but they were nothing compared to what could have happened and the weight of information he had received. The Four Tails has re-emerged, Zetsu thought as he rapidly traveled back to the hideout where Obito was. Thinking about him, however, made the artificial human feel like it was sleeping on pins and needles. The main reason for this was because he had never told Obito about Rin's survival. It had been a shock to find out that the Konoha Kunoichi has somehow survived getting stabbed through the heart. The only saving grace was that Konoha had kept her hidden for over half a year, which had helped Zetsu fool Obito into believing that his beloved Rin had died. It also helped that Konoha had decided to build her a tombstone just so that no one looked into her further. Now, if this was ever found out by Obito, Zetsu would be the one with the grave and all of Madara's plans would go down the drain. The main reason Obito had even agreed with Madara's plans was because of Rin's death, so if Obito found out that she was alive and that Zetsu had been keeping this info away from him, a few more years and it won't matter anymore, he thought. After all, by that time Obito would have committed so many crimes and horrors that would have no choice but to move forward with the plan. All of this, however, would have been a non-issue if it wasn't for him. Zetsu recalled the face of the silver-eyed, white-haired, brown-skinned turd that had ruined his and Madara's carefully laid-out plans. If he hadn't existed and if he hadn't developed mystical healing, everything would have gone smoothly. Zetsu knew. Using his white half to perfectly mimic the facial features and chakra signatures of certain medical personnel really came in handy when trying to figure out how the hell Konoha had gained the ability to regrow limbs. If Yoro simply hadn't existed, Zetsu wouldn't have to worry about Obito killing him because Rin would be dead as a doorknob, the Four Tails wouldn't have disappeared for so damn long, and he wouldn't be running away for his damn life because someone decided to blow up a few freaking kilometers of land. Zetsu narrowed its eyes. I need to find a way to get rid of him, but first, he thought as he arrived at the hideout where Obito was staying. Obito will have to know about the Four Tails new. Chapter 23. The area in front of me was surrounded by a dense billowing fog. My enhanced sight could hardly glimpse at my forefront while the fog itself saturated my energy resonance senses, indicating that it was not natural whatsoever. The journey from Konoha to here had taken Orochimaru and I a couple of hours, not only due to its distance but also due to its highly secluded location. The numerous hurdles and passes he and I had to take were insane, but it was apparently because the White Snake Sage didn't really like to be bothered. "This is where I drop you off," Orochimaru stated as he stood next to me. "Up ahead can only be traversed by individuals who have a specific desire in mind, else the Snake Sage will simply kill you if you bother her for no reason." I nodded my head before asking, "I'm assuming you already got what you wanted from here then?" He didn't answer for a moment. "Partially," he said. He didn't elaborate further. "Let Minato know that I might be gone for a little while. I wouldn't want him to worry about me," I asked him. "Also, if Danzo asks, I'm taking my long-earned off day." Orochimaru merely inclined his head before he left in a burst of speed using the body flicker. With that episode out of the way, I walked into the fog. As my feet moved forward, I realized that regardless of any which way I looked, there was no path backward. The only sounds audible were those of my footsteps, and I could neither see nor hear anything or anyone around me. I was alone. Still, I continued onwards. From what Orochimaru told me about Ryuchi Cave, in order to have an audience with the White Snake Sage, I needed to pass some trials. He hadn't told me what to expect as, according to him, the trials would be completely different depending on the mood of the trial giver. That being said, I wasn't particularly worried about any trial they could throw my way. Whether it tested strength, speed, intelligence, wisdom, power, I was confident in being able to tackle them. The only thing I had to be wary of was that if I did fail any task, the snakes were allowed to eat me and my chakra. Worse came to worse, I would just run away using my ID. As I continued on my walk, my thoughts took a different turn. Sage mode. Orochimaru had already told me that the Snake Sage would be able to grant my request and that I would be able to mold Senjutsu chakra within a couple of days. But he hadn't told me at what cost. I had already paid him for this information, but what would the Snake Sage want in return? I knew that nothing in this world was free, so if she was willing to give me something like that, even if I didn't have to pay her specifically, I would have to pay something. No matter though. My mind had already been set. As these thoughts flitted through my mind, the fog around me began to somewhat clear. In front of my view appeared a bright luxurious palace, a bright sign with the kanji for Ryuchi Cave printed vertically above the doorway. On the sides of the door and of the building were many lamps with the kanji for dragon printed in them, whose luminescence illuminated the otherwise gloomy surroundings. Suddenly, the door creaked open. I narrowed my eyes. A woman appeared from the building's interior. She had fair skin and dark hair that was tied into 3 buns, with one on the front of her head and 2 on the back. She wore a long, loose-fitting white robe that had green trimmings around the sleeves and neck area, with the neck area also having a green tomo. She also wore a golden tiara that had green ribbons hanging from either end. She looked at me with a smile. "We've been expecting you for a while. Welcome to Ryuchi Cave." At first glance, she seemed like a genuine human being with a pretty face and a nice smile. However, I knew she wasn't genuine. And she was definitely not human. Name? Race, Snake. Level, LVL 175. State of mind. Is intoxicated with your chakra. Wants to eat your chakra. Feels an odd sense of kinship. Is somewhat curious about you. She closely observed me for a bit, her eyes momentarily narrowing to slits before she closed them while that fake smile remained ever present on her face. My name is Tagiriheim. Why don't you come inside? I obviously didn't trust her. However, she was probably part of the trial that I needed to overcome, so I nodded and followed her inside the palace. The interior was luxuriously decorated with lanterns and pillars. The surroundings were glittering. The atmosphere was peaceful. The scent of delicious food wafted through the air. And I did not care. I'm here to see the White Snake Sage, I said simply. I know that I have to get through some trials to see her, but I'm on a bit of a time constraint, so if you don't mind, I would like for us to start. She blinked in surprise at me for a moment before she tilted her head with a smile. I see. Please relax for a moment and eat while I'll go get everything set up. With that, she closed her eyes and inclined her head slightly before turning her back and walking away. I frowned. Empathy and deconstructive analysis told me enough about my opponent. She was already planning something under that amicable facade. I found it amusing. I moved my legs towards the dinner table where a table filled with freshly cooked food was neatly placed on a table. I smiled. Did she take me for a fool? With that, I sat down at one end of the table, crossed my legs and arms, closed my eyes, and waited. I sank into meditation, but I didn't fully activate the skill since I didn't actually want to meet Jay. I wanted to feel the natural energy. I could easily sense it. Years of research and using my mystical healing in addition to my LVL 100 meditation made sensing natural energy simplistic. It was calming and I could feel it ebb and flow in the environment all around me. With just a thought, I could try to absorb some of the energy. Not yet. I would rather die than get petrified for life. No need risking the latter when I could get what I wanted while risking the former. Just a bit of patience was needed. My ears suddenly twitched as the echoes of approaching footsteps rung through them. I opened an eye and watched as Tagaraheim approached me with a tray of dumplings in hand and that smile on her face. She put it down on the table next to me. Please eat a lot, okay? The trial will be over by the time you finish. I stared at the food in front of me and at the feet laid out around me. Tell me, where did you find the time to cook all of this food? She blinked and tilted her head before smiling. Dear guest, of course. Of course, I prepared it as soon as I sensed you come. It took me 10 minutes and 43 seconds to arrive at this place and there are exactly 11 trays of various foods perfectly prepared on this table, I stated plainly. Even with clones, just the preparation and waiting time for cooking would take much longer than that. Try again. She raised a brow before giggling. Of course, we sensed you before you entered our territory, or how would we be able to prepare for you? That's also false. I replied in disinterest. I can detect chakra signatures and I definitely did not detect yours at any point before I entered the fog. Try again. Her smile was strained, but she managed to uphold it perfectly as she continued. Well, of course, this isn't just for you. I had been preparing a feast beforehand for my family. I smiled at her with hidden ridicule. You're not even human, so why would you go through all this trouble to cook this food for yourself and the other snakes in Ryuchi cave? Empathy could sense that she was lying through her teeth. Of course, it's because I love cook. Stop. I said simply before waving my hand. A burst of wind spread out from my simple movement and blew everything away. The plates shattered all over the ground while the food items scattered everywhere else. I don't have time for your games, so either give me my trial or take me to the White Snake Sage, I said, standing up and looking at the snake woman who was looking at me wide-eyed. You? She began as she stared at me oddly. Suddenly, the lights around us shut off before I noticed that the luxurious and delicious food all around me began to decay right before my eyes. Not only that, the inside of the palace was beginning to corrode before it fully broke down. Then I noticed it. Bones were littered across the ground around me while the palace had completely disappeared. Additionally, the fog from before was now once more visible all around me. The only thing that stayed constant was Tagaraheim, who had a grin on her face. Who would have thought that you would easily see through me? I looked around once more. I thought so. Genjutsu. Normally, it didn't affect me whatsoever. However, there were exceptions. Generally speaking, any ability that tried to interfere with my mind was null because of Gamer's mind, therefore, I was largely immune to almost all genjutsu. Almost all. It was possible for someone proficient in yin release to create genjutsu without trying to control someone's chakra flow with their own. Instead, they could affect a particular object or general area and create an optical illusion using their chakra. It was kind of like using the henge, except you were using it on an object/area and not yourself. Of course, it was more complicated than then. Since that type of genjutsu didn't control my chakra flow or my mind and only manipulated the sensory information my eyes received, gamer's mind didn't block it. Furthermore, they could also use that type of mastery to extend to smell and sound. So long as they didn't try to directly affect my mind, they could bypass gamer's mind. However, they still couldn't block my empathy and energy resonance. From the beginning, I had sensed that her chakra was covering the surroundings and the food. If I tried, I could have easily dispelled the illusion, but I was really curious as to what her end goal was for all of this. Serving me rotten food? Who would play such a stupid and meaningless prank? I focused on Taguriheim, whose face morphed into a snake-like visage as she began to levitate in midair with a feral grin. It's really a pity that I can't get a taste of your sublime chakra. It smells just so delectable. She looked at me with an intoxicated expression while her face began to transform back to look more human-like. You lost. A pleasant-sounding voice sounded out from the distance behind Taguriheim. She grimaced. I know. Our job is to weed out those who wander to Ryuchi cave without purpose. Yes. The voice replied. Master White Snake Sage only allows us to eat those who fail the trials awaiting them. Taguriheim looked back towards me. Those who wander here have given themselves up to madness in search of power. Don't assume you'll make it all the dash. Wait just a moment. I said with a raised hand. What are you both talking about? What was the trial? The voice in the distance giggled. Taguriheim blinked. You found out that the food was poisoned even though I was using my Genju dash. That was it? I asked, interrupting her. She nodded. Really? Her smile strained and I could sense the annoyance building up inside her. You're joking. A vein bulged on her forehead as her eye twitched. That's pathetic. She glared at me. You? Now Taguriheim. The voice in the distance said in amusement and mockery. You already failed your part, so now it's my turn. Do please step back for me, will you? Taguriheim sked and floated backward deeper into the fog, though she didn't forget to glare at me the entire way through. And then it was silent. Suddenly, I sensed the presence of a different creature who I assumed to be the owner of the voice. It was only after a moment that I was able to catch a glimpse of her as she quickly appeared through the fog before turning and floating away. She looked very similar to Taguriheim except instead of 3 hair buns, she had 2 and she also wore red eyeshadow. I raised a brow as I watched her float towards the distance before shrugging and following her. She maneuvered oddly and hovered through the dense fog with erratic movem. Ping. Gamer's mind has blocked a mental intrusion. I halted. It was at this time that the woman in front of me stopped while floating in the air cross-legged and smiled. My name is Ichikishimaheim. Why don't you play with me? She said brightly before her body vanished into the fog. Her mysteriousness was meaningless as while the fog prevented me from accurately sensing her position with my chakra detection abilities, I could still sense her emotions. With this information, I quickly followed her, making sure to keep track of my surroundings lest I get stuck in a trap. In but a moment, I suddenly found myself inside a crystal cave with blue glittering crystalline structures making up the entirety of my surroundings. Pillars and stalagmites made of crystals and were all around me and nothing else. I heard a giggle and turned my head to see Ichikishimaheim pop her head out from behind a crystal pillar. She then seemingly disappeared and popped her head out of another one while looking at me expectantly. I have her a dead gaze. She pouted. You're no fun. Then she smiled. But I wonder if you will be able to remain so calm all the way through? Without waiting for me to answer, she floated from her position and flew towards an opening on the cave wall. I walked in that direction as well and entered the opening before it suddenly shut behind me. I merely looked around and saw that she had trapped me in a small room of the cave. I looked to the blocked opening and noticed that on the door that now covered the entrance to this room, there were many different sized holes. I looked to the ground and saw that it contained many different sized gems. It didn't take a genius to figure out what this trial was. I'm sure you figured it out by now. Ichikishimahime stayed as she appeared behind me. Fit the correct gem in the hole in the wall. If you fail. She licked her lips. I looked at her uninterestedly. I could roughly figure out what she had been trying to accomplish by mentally intruding me. This entire setting around me was merely a mirage formed by in-release enhanced genjutsu, making it seem much more realistic. However, it wasn't actually real. Therefore, she had tried to place me in a subtle mental block, so to speak, that would only break if I fit every hole in the wall with the correct gem. However, she didn't know she hadn't put me in a genjutsu. Truly, sad. What are you waiting for? The snake woman said with a smile as she floated upside down. Have you given up already? You know, I love my chakra on the verge of disappearing before I savor it. You should at least put in some effort if you're going to give you dash. In release, spiritual pressure. An immense wave of energy emanated from my body and spread throughout the surroundings. I packed more chakra into the technique, the resulting effect causing the surrounding environment to slowly crumble. Ichikishimahime's eyes widened. What are you? Stalagmites and heaps of rock fell from the ceiling, however, as soon as they touched the ground, they dissipated like the illusion they were. With a short grunt, I released a quick but powerful burst of energy in a complete 360-degree radius around me. Everything was pushed away. Ah! Ichikishimahime screamed as she closed her eyes and flew back, while the in-release genjutsu she had created completely shattered. Immediately after, fog once more surrounded my vision. I dusted myself off. How? Ichikishimahime stated in amazement as she floated in front of me some distance away. To be able to so easily break my genjutsu? I asked. Did I pass? And if so, can I move on to the next one? She narrowed her eyes before sighing. I really don't like you. She said simply. You seem like such a pain to eat. With that, she faded away. Even if instinct hadn't warned me, empathy had already alerted me to the newest arrival. With a tilt of my head and a slight turn of my body, I was able to avoid the sneak attack that had been aimed my way. Tisk. The assailant said before she disappeared back into the fog. I waited patiently. From what I could detect, she was a good deal stronger than I was, but my reaction speed and skill would be able to keep me safe. I leaped backward and flipped in midair as the snake woman attacked me from below. The moment my feet touched the ground, I did a few back handsprings and quickly distanced myself from the attacker. You're not too bad. The woman said as she floated in front of me calmly. My name is Tajutsuhime. Since my two sisters' methods didn't work well against you, I'll be a bit more direct. She said as she licked her lips. And charged. My eyes glowed and the world slowed down in my view as the woman approached me, her hungry visage made even more evident. I took a deep breath. Wind style, great breakthrough. And exhaled. Like a hurricane, my attack tore the ground apart and parted the fog before smashing into the attacking woman. As she was sent flying away with a short scream, I built up fire-natured chakra within my body and exhaled it while keeping great breakthrough active. Fire style, majestic destroyer flame. The amplification effects of my wind jutsu on my fire jutsu boosted the intensity of the flames to immense levels, the ground below literally melting from the heat. After a moment, however, I ended my attack and screened the battlefield as her emotional signature had disappeared from my range. I immediately raised my arms to guard against the sudden blow, simultaneously utilizing my new steel release on them to augment my defenses. As my body rocketed through the air, I narrowed my eyes and quickly grabbed a foldable wind demon shuriken from my inventory. I imbued the blades with lightning, cocked my arm back, and threw it. Fuma Shuriken Shadow Clone. 1 became 2. 2 became 4. 4 became 8. The ear-piercing screech of the rapidly spinning shuriken rung throughout the battlefield, and they continued to multiply. Over 100 Fuma Shuriken moved perpendicular to the ground and tore up the earth along the way. They reached my opponent. Her eyes sharp, she quickly bent low and twisted her body, allowing her to dodge in between the gaps between two of my numerous shuriken. Just at that moment, I flipped and crouched low, my feet skidding across the ground to a stop. Simultaneously, I clenched my fist, tightened my muscles and yanked. Through the wire attached to them, the rigged blades of all the shuriken disconnected from my motion and launched towards my opponent at immense speeds. Taijutsuime transformed her lower body into a serpent's tail and quickly slithered across the ground as the hail of lightning-coated blades flew towards her. She deftly maneuvered through them as the disconnected shuriken blades continually punctured the earth, sparks of lightning flitting off them. I grinned. A gigantic powerful ball of swirling chakra formed in my hand. Amanoto Kotachi. I swapped places with one of the numerous disconnected Fuma Shuriken blades and appeared right above Taijutsuime. Time slowed down in my perception due to my accelerated analysis, and I watched she turned her head towards me, her pupils constricting. My glowing eyes found all of her weaknesses. Big Ball Rasengan. I slammed the attack into her back, her body instantly crashing into the ground. She screamed while the ground beneath cratered immensely from the impact, spiderweb cracks spreading to the distance all around. I drove the technique further into her back before my palm made contact with her skin, and I engraved my Amanoto Kotachi on her with my chakra. With that, I leaped backward and kept a firm distance between us. Critical. Minus 286,600. My hand reached down and picked up one of the Fuma Shuriken blades off the ground. Since it was already engraved with an Amanoto Kotachi mark, I quickly tossed it high into the air. I clapped my hands together. Around this moment, Taijutsuime emerged from the crater and glared at me with immense killing intent. Her pupils constricted as her body morphed into that of a white snake before she hissed and charged towards me with her gaping maw. 110 meters. I continued to focus on the task at hand. Immense amounts of chakra coalesced between my palms as sparks of electricity flickered. The ball of energy grew and grew, the pressure from its presence causing my feet to sink into the ground. 70 meters. It then expanded incredibly. 45 meters. Then, I condensed it. 20 meters. My gaze turned upward as I raised my hands into the air towards the airborne Fuma Shuriken blade. 5 meters. And let loose. Lightning style, lightning bomb. 1 meter away. Just as I could feel her breath on my face. Amanoto Kotachi. The snake woman switched places with the Fuma Shuriken in the air and was in the path of my attack. I watched as her eyes widened at the ball of energy that was ever expanding in her vision. Before it connected, a devastating blast of energy swept away the nearby fog instantaneously and generated immense amounts of heat. The lightning sparking off the attack charred the ground even though it was so high up in the air, while the tumultuous winds caused my clothes to flutter while I gazed at my technique. Then it stopped, the explosion of energy having run out of fumes. Critical. Minus 692,850. HP 172550/11520000. An object cast a giant shadow over me and I turned my gaze upwards to see that it was a snake falling from the sky. I took a step back right before the snake crashed into the ground in front of me. Its scales were charged and its breathing was labored, yet it was still well and alive. Did I pass? I asked the snake woman who was groaning on the ground. Or do I have to kill you? Of course. Of course, I was quite literally 99% out of chakra, since I would not have won had I not used almost every ounce of it in my last attack. With my current condition, I would only be able to muster a normal Rasengan. Anything greater and I would most likely faint from chakra exhaustion. But she didn't know that. The snake's body shuddered before she quickly transformed back into her human form. She looked up at me begrudgingly before she flinched and supported herself on the ground. You? That's more than enough. An elderly but powerful voice boomed. Right at that moment, the fog completely parted, allowing me a picture-clear view of where I was. I was on a well-paved walkway while on either side of me lay tombstones. I looked in front of me at the direction of the voice and saw that there was a temple standing there. It had the kanji for Ryuchi Temple printed horizontally across it on a banner above the door. I could tell from its look and feel that it was not some illusion created by genjutsu like the one Taguriheim had created when I first appeared. You kids are all so noisy. The ancient-sounding voice said with a sigh before it continued with more power evident in its tone, those who come here seek to obtain the sage's power. You who have passed all 3 trails have earned the right to see me. Come. I looked at Taijutsuime, who was now shakily on her feet, before I looked back in front of me towards the stairs leading up to the Ryuchi Cave Temple. With nothing left to interest me here, I headed up the stairs and arrived at the door to temple. As if sensing me, the door opened on its own as I approached and I entered inside. Looking ahead, I saw that there were stairs that led up to the top of the temple where the snake sage was no doubt located. And I could sense her. She was powerful. Frighteningly so. With a little push off my feet, I scaled the entirety of the flight of stairs and arrived at the place where the snake sage was located. There in front of me was an old lady who was laying down propped up on her elbow on what looked like a couch. I simply asked, "Is there a need for the illusions?" The old lady smiled and her eyelids narrowly opened, showcasing her yellow eyes and slitted pupils. No. Her current form dissipated like mist before in its place was an extremely large, albino rat snake, many times the size of a human, her massive body wrapped in thick coils along which were yellow circular bands. She wore a turban with 2 pointed edges and a red orb on top along with an orange headdress. She wore a chain with a green orb around her neck and also smoked as well, using a long cigarette holder. This was the true form of the white snake sage. I nodded my head before asking. I'm going to assume you know why I'm here. Of course, I know. She said, smoke puffing from her cigarette. Within Ryuchi Cave, there is nothing my ears cannot hear. Then, this should be quick. I replied. Since I've already passed the trails necessary. The snake sage chuckled and puffed some more smoke before asking, before that, entertain this old lady with a question of mine. Who brought you here? Only those who deliberately seek out Ryuchi Cave can come here. Orochimaru. I simply replied, seeing no reason not to. He. She laughed to herself. A man filled with insatiable avarice for knowledge and power, I wonder what you could have possibly given him to help you. Something he wanted. Was all I replied. The white snake sage chuckled to herself once more. Humans are filled with such an unending amount of greed, all those who come to me have abandoned themselves and everything out of such avarice. Her eyes gazed down at me before she asked. Since you passed the trails and are here to learn senjutsu from me, I will grant you your desires. Tell me, do you know how I teach senjutsu? I paused and shook my head. No, I was only told that you taught it very directly. She smiled. That's one way to put it. I couldn't even see it coming. All I could feel were her fangs injected into my body. My eyes widened substantially. I could feel a foreign but familiar substance being injected into my body. Natural energy. Thump! The white snake sage removed her fangs and went back to her previous position while looked down at me. This could be considered your final trial. Thump! I staggered, a feeling of numbness shooting up my body as cold sweat dripped down my face. If you can survive this, then I will accept you. Thump. My vision swam as numerous gigantic whitesnakes appeared in and out of focus in my view. If not, I will devour you. Thump. NGH. I grunted as my body collapsed to the ground. I was barely able to use my shaking hands as support while my breathing became labored. Before I felt it. Pain. Unimaginable pain ripped through my body. My body spasmed and my fists clenched as I tried to force the pain down, but it didn't help. The pain was as if flesh-eating ants were gnawing at my skin and crawling through my veins and arteries. I believed I screamed as I felt the vibrations from my throat as I opened my mouth, yet I couldn't even tell from the insistent ringing in my ears. That didn't change the fact that my veins were popping while cold sweat was dripping from my body. The thought of dying didn't really register to me as I would just come back anyway, but by God how much this hurt. Gamer's body has leveled up by 1. 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 Gamer's body has. Gamer's body has reached level 200, max. Ping. You have unlocked the sub-perk, Resistances, by reaching level 200 on Gamer's body. Ping. You have unlocked the innate trait, $and %# and. By reaching. Ping. Sage Transformation has been unlocked by reaching level 200 on Gamer's body. Ping. Using Sage Transformation, you have unlocked Sage Mode. Sage Transformation and Sage Mode are synonymous. Sage Transformation Mode active LVL Max. Sage Transformation is a method of attaining Sage Mode by utilizing special body fluids and exposing them to natural energy. The resulting bodily reaction leads to a gain in increased physical capabilities such as in strength, speed, stamina, reflexes, perception, and durability, along with improved power of techniques. The resulting increase in your abilities is dependent on how much chakra or energy you have. Increase STR by ENGY *0.75. Increase VIT by ENGY *0.75. Increase DX by ENGY *0.75. Increase ENGY by ENGY *0.75. 100% increase to movement speed. 200% increase to durability. 250% increase to reaction speed. 1000% increase to sensing range. Error. Error. Error and $%. Analyzing error. Error located. Rapid force change to host's body. Searching for patch. Method of correction found. Patching error. You have leveled up. You have leveled up. You have leveled up. Congratulations. You have reached level 100. Ping. Quest complete. To infinity and beyond. Reward, system update. System update criteria has been met. System updating. System will be offline during update. System update 0.00000106%. I fainted. Yoru, Gamer Dash. If you fail, I will devour you. The white snake sage said as she looked at the young human, no, the creature in front of her. She truthfully didn't believe she would get that chance, however. From the moment he stepped in, she could sense that he was different. It was very faint, and if not for her living for so long and her own capabilities, she would have missed it. Whatever he was not completely human at the very least. He smelled just barely like the snakes in. Her expression changed. What? She felt it. An extremely powerful aura erupted from Yoru, one that continued to grow in intensity until it fully enveloped her. Her heart nearly seized. This palpitating aura. Then, the white snake sage saw it. He began to transform. Pristine white scales appeared on portions of his body, covering the outer edges of his face and extending down from the side of his neck to the sides and back of his arms, upper body, and lower body. Pure white horns grew on either side of his head, pointed slightly backward. His hair became aflame with brilliant pure white energy. His eyes changed color, turning golden from their originally silver coloring. His pupils transformed, narrowing vertically and constricting. Like a snake's. This was wrong. Very wrong. Whenever the white snake sage bit into an individual and injected natural energy into them, they would undergo a process known as snakification. They would become more snake than human in the process of obtaining senjutsu. If they survived, she would obtain them as an apprentice and teach them how to mold senjutsu, and if their body was compatible enough, they would obtain sage mode. But there was no way had never been human to begin with. Whatever Yoru was going through, it wasn't it. This energy being released from him could not possibly have come about from the snakification. However, before the white snake sage could contemplate any further, her eyes widened. That should not be possible. A brilliant cloak of pure white energy covered Yoru's body, the winds churning in response. The ground beneath Yoru cracked while portions of his white chakra shroud formed into ethereal snakes that moved and coiled around his body. His previously down form was slowly raised by the snakes until he was on his feet again. His body stood tall though his gaze was completely blank. He was unconscious. But more importantly, he had obtained sage mode. Then, her eyes constricted. The aura emanating from him, now, she was sure. He wasn't human. The pressure emanating from Yoru physically manifested in the surroundings as cracks spread throughout. As she stared into those shimmering golden eyes, the snake sage was reminded of the days where she was a mere hatchling looking up to the snake elder at that time. No. The feeling she got was even more intense. It was as if she was staring into the eyes of a beast she could not even comprehend. One which would devour everything. This feeling of weakness wasn't born out of some disparity of strength. It was simply due to hierarchy. What are you? The snake sage muttered as she leaned back and cautiously stared at Yoru. The building and the surroundings were trembling from his energy output, dust falling from the ceiling in response to the stimulus. Master! Lord Snake Sage! Sage-sama! 3 voices yelled as they burst into the hall. Feeling the palpitating aura emanating from the top of the hall where the white snake sage stood, they quickly made their way up there only to pause in shock. What is? Tajitsuine began to ask as she stared at Yoru's still form in shock. The pressure emanating from him caused her body to tremble in trepidation and the energy released from his body. How could she not be familiar with senjutsu? Ichikishimahime made sure her distance though her eyes sparkled as she gazed at Yoru. Master, what is happening? Tagarahime asked, her eyes carefully scanning Yoru. The white snake sage didn't reply as she continued to observe Yoru. To be able to achieve sage mode in mere moments. Tajitsuime stated as she calmed the turbulent waves in her heart before she noticed movement next to her. Ichikishimahime, what are you? The white snake sage's pupils shrank. Don't touch dash. It was too late. Blood splashed through the air. There was a pause as Ichikishimahime's eyes widened before she looked to her now empty right arm socket, blood dripping from the wound. Her heart froze as she looked at Yoru's arm only to see a giant white scale in his grasp. The terror in her heart could not be described. This type of speed. If he had aimed for her head. Ichikishimahime shuddered and slowly stepped away before she looked at her empty arm socket. In but a few moments, her arm began to regrow before it returned to its normal size. Since her current form was merely a transformation and not her true form, Yoru had not truly done any true harm by ripping her arm off. However, the event was enough to make her that much more apprehensive. I just wanted to touch his scales. Both Tagarahime and Tajitsuime looked at her incredulously. He is unconscious, however, this makes him even more dangerous. The white snake sage said as she puffed another plume of smoke from her cigarette. He is moving purely on instinct, so anything that comes close to him will be regarded as an enemy. Then, Tagiriheim began as she looked at the pure white aura radiating off of Yoru and the white ethereal snakes of energy coiling around him. What are you going to do? Nothing. The snake sage replied as she leaned back. I will simply wait for him to wake up, he passed this trial after all. When I first saw him, he gave me a familiar feeling. Tagiriheim stated. It's now more intense and suffocating. What, is he? Ichikishimaheim asked as she once more gazed at her scale in Yoru's hand and his own scales covering his person. The white snake sage glances down at Yoru, another puff of smoke escaping her lips. He's an anomaly. Yoru, gamer dash. I can't say that was a good or bad decision on your end. Were the first words Jay told me as I appeared in front of him. I didn't think it would turn out like this. Was the only reply I could give. He shook his head. No, I suppose it truly cannot be blamed solely on you. Your gamer's body and its forceful improvement were due to a variety of variables. Oh? I said with a tilt of my head. He nodded. For starters, if you had simply leveled it up naturally to level 200, you would have unlocked Sage Transformation and obtained Sage Mode. It also didn't help that you had injected yourself with exogenous genetic material some moments prior. Additionally, with Gamer's body, you already had perfect attunement with natural energy, and if you had simply tried to absorb it, you would have succeeded on your own. I looked at him with slight incredulity. Why didn't you ever tell me this? You never asked. My right eye twitched. Jay sighed. It's only fortunate that it could correct itself before something worse happened. At the end of the day, as long as you're fine and your body hasn't turned into a genetic monstrosity, then all is well. Now, however, since you were prematurely forced to increase your level, I'll have to start working on that last update. He said as multiple screens appeared in front of him before he began to rapidly type and move between them. Another round of silence. Before I asked, why do you care? Something had been bugging me for quite a while now, and it wasn't until I saw him again that I pinpointed what it was. Last time when I asked you what I was, you went on about how I was human but not human. That's fine, and I suppose it answered my question. But there's still one thing bothering me. Jay stopped his hand movements and glanced at me briefly before looking back at his screen intently. I looked at him, my brows slightly furrowed. You said that you cared about me. Why? As a self-proclaimed hyperdimensional being, what could you see in me? Why did you give me this ability? But more important than that, what do you want? These were what had been bothering me for some time now. It just made little sense for him to care about me, just as it made no sense for me to care about the ants I stepped on when I walked. Of course, the difference between me and Jay was supposedly much greater than that between me and an ant, but the general idea was still the same. Did he have a hidden motive? But in that case, what could he possibly want from me that he couldn't get himself if he was as powerful as he claimed? I suppose all my questions could be summed up as, what am I to you? My only job is to keep you safe and make sure things run smoothly. He simply replied as he went back to work. As for what you are to me, obviously I am you, therefore, I don't need anything from you, nor can you give me anything. What are you dash? Jay furrowed his brows as he looked at the screens. Unfortunately, because of you, I have a lot of things I need to focus on right now, so we can have this conversation at a later date. Before I could protest, my vision suddenly swam and warped as I felt a tug on my soul. I was immediately pulled away from my position until I saw the tree pull further and further away from my vision. Yoru, gamer dash. Location? Third-person POV? It's almost time. Jay thought to himself as he watched Yoru leave before he stared at his hands. Very faintly, one could notice that there were minute motes of light emerging from his being and floating away. The rate was extremely slow and it was hardly noticeable, but it was still occurring. Jay sighed. It's almost been 10 years, my job will be finished soon and after that. He looked up to the tree. He had never had that long to exist, to begin with. The moment Yoru's physical body had been made and placed within the elemental nations, his time had been ticking. But all was well. Once this thing can finally run on autopilot, I won't be needed anymore anyway. It's a good thing I'll have plenty of time to make sure everything checks out. Jay smiled. And then, I can disappear. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket past going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.